these weekly art talks. My name is Bruno. I'm from the Dr. Sun Yat-Sen Classical Chinese Garden in Vancouver. And today I'm again very excited because Emma, she accepted to host this talk today. And I discovered Emma actually because she has an upcoming book called Drawn Vancouver. It's coming up on June 23rd. So I was forwarded an email and I saw Emma's work, and my thought was, yeah, she needs to be in our art talks. And yeah, I'm very, very excited. So the talk will last, I would say, around 40 minutes. And throughout the call, if you have any questions, feel free to do and to ask them on the chat room, which I believe would be on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Otherwise, in the end, you can ask to unmute yourselves and you can pose a question to Emma and she will gladly answer. And we'll have probably a 15 to 20 minute question and answer, so don't hesitate to ask. So without further ado, thank you very much again, Emma. Thank you also very much for joining us today. And let's get the art talk started.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Bruno. So as Bruno mentioned, he discovered my work through this book that's coming out. I grew up in Vancouver, so this is Drawn Vancouver. And the drawings inside I did all on location. So I sit outside with a pen and a sketchbook, and I think I have one of my pens somewhere here, but they're not expensive pens. They're just pens I buy at Staples, because I actually, if I buy the fancy fine tip black pens, I just destroy them within a day or two. I tend to apply a lot of pressure, and I work quickly, and that's sort of part of the nature of my drawings. And then I add the color later in the computer. So you'll see as we go through some of my images that the color is very flat. And I started that about 6 or 7 years ago. I had studied art at UBC. I had studied architecture in Nova Scotia. I was working in architecture, but I came to a juncture where I didn't have architecture work anymore, and I started a house portrait business. So I started drawing houses in my neighborhood, one every day. That's in Halifax. And instead of using watercolor, which is beautiful but has a lot more variability, I decided using Photoshop, which I had become very comfortable with in architecture, was a nice way to work. And as it's turned out, almost all the books I've illustrated, including children's books, I use Photoshop for color. So here behind me, I do have one of the drawings in the book. And this was the idea, a last minute idea from a friend yesterday. So we're in the garden here. So we can just all pretend we're in Chinatown in the Sun Yat-Sen Gardens, which for years has been one of my favorite places in Vancouver. And not just because you're hosting me today, Bruno, but just that sense of peace and calm. So I thought I'm going to enable screen share screen. And we are going to look through some of my work, starting with Chinatown. So this is one of the, I would say, chapters in my book, and you can see that the neighborhood is indicated by the sign. So there's text sort of letting you know where you are. And there's also text which is written after I've done the drawing. So I do my drawing first, and then I come up with text, whether it's something I overhear or a story someone tells me. So here we have a ginkgo tree in front of the Sino United Publishing, which is around the corner from the gardens. A ginkgo tree drops golden yellow leaves in front of Sino United Publishing's red and white painted storefront in Chinatown. Ginkgo trees survived the Ice Age and have been used medicinally to improve memory. Across the street, a woman paints the base of a condo building. She stops to make a call to the building superintendent. I want to make sure I have the right gray. So there you have a little bit of humor, because of course, Chinatown is generally very colorful, and then some of these newer buildings coming in, we know how much people like the color gray in Vancouver. So, but that was all by chance. It wasn't premeditated. So yeah, it's a kind of like being not an archaeologist, but definitely a sense of discovery and adventure when I go out. Um, and so here we have the entranceway to the gardens, and I find that to be very intriguing, just that very clean kind of white wall, and then through the archways seeing all the bamboo and that sense of invitation. So I decided to draw both the outside of the garden, and then this would have been 2017 actually, in July, that I would have come to the garden, and it was sort of the height of summer, and I drew this view looking across to the pagoda, and there's a child going over the bridge, and of course the koi in the water, and I just wrote simply, inside the Yatsang Park, it is cool and calm. So this is the part of the park that's accessible to the public if you're familiar with it, for free, which is amazing. You can just go there and eat your lunch. And then, of course, there's the more formal aspect of the gardens around the corner where you pay. So I thought this would be interesting to share. It's not something that's in my book. So you'll see that here there's a lot more color and it's a lot more saturated. This was actually a mistake in the process of coloring in the previous drawing. There were some lines that were open and I used some black somewhere and it just sort of spilt everywhere, the way you might have that happen with paint. And then when I turn off the layer in my Photoshop drawing that is the lines, you get a very different feeling. It's more just shapes. And though this isn't in the book and I don't tend to exhibit this work, I always have a little folder on my desktop where I'm saving these works that I just call fragments. And I find they can be really, really interesting. So I thought you might enjoy. Here you have the more legible kind of image, and here we have a more mysterious, magical kind of nighttime feeling. So yeah, just so you know that there's these different moments that happen in the process, and to me they're very interesting. And here we have the Newtown Bakery, which is one of my favorite places in Chinatown. So I'm just making sure, can you see everything okay, Bruno? Yeah, okay, wonderful. So in front of me, I drew what I was about to eat, my steamed dumplings and my greens. And then I was very intrigued by this table of men who were just chatting and having tea in a leisurely way. And then the lineup, of course, and the people working behind the counter. And even across the street, you can see, I think it was around Canada today, so there's these Canadian flags, but there's also lanterns for sale, and the boxes stacked up high in the window for the people coming to the bakery. So yeah, if any of you have been to the Newtown Bakery, I hope this captures some of the feeling you might know there. And of course, this was before COVID, so now looking at some of these images is very poignant because we can't necessarily gather in the same way right now. So I wanted to also talk a little bit about how I became an author and illustrator. So like I said, I needed to make money somehow, so I started drawing house portraits for clients in my neighborhood. And it was around that point that I had about 30 drawings of my neighborhood. And in the fall in Canada, there's a national festival called Word on the Street. And so I decided I would go to Word on the Street and pitch a book idea about my neighborhood, the North End in Halifax, and bring along 10 little drawings, but in a little kind of accordion fold out. So I took a long piece of paper and had 10 little images, and I made 3 because there was going to be 3 editors from 3 different publishing houses. And I pitched my idea for 5 minutes, which was basically an adult picture book, because I think grown-ups need pictures as much as children do. And I wanted it to just be about my neighborhood that I lived in. And Formac Publishing in Nova Scotia responded, and the response, though, was that it can't just be your neighborhood. It has to be all of Halifax, and even some of the suburbs that don't get the same attention that those more central neighborhoods get. And I actually agreed with that idea. So we decided to test it, and I went to a neighborhood that's not as well known for its character or, beautiful architecture. And still, even in those places where it's mostly strip malls, there are stories. So that was kind of the proof in the pudding, and we decided to make up a contract and an agreement, and this was my very first book. So I'm very proud of this book because people connected to it when it came out in 2015, and you see on the front, this is the gazebo in the public gardens in Halifax, but I draw in such a way that I'm not using a pencil first. Nothing is quite perfect, but I think that's why people are attracted to it. And then you see some people wearing dresses, and it's actually prom in Halifax. So you have this particular weekend where the garden becomes very crowded with people in beautiful, colorful dresses and tuxedos. And so I made a point of going there on that particular day. And on the back, you have the lighthouse at Peggy's Cove, which is very iconic. But the day I happened to go there, people were painting. So the lighthouse was closed, and you see someone on a ladder in my drawing. So in this way, I'm always surprised what you can manage to see when you just go one day and see what's going to happen. Here is our library in Halifax, which is a newer building, and kind of a big deal for us there that we have this more modern architecture, and it's a very inclusive space. So you can kind of see the view of people, even up the top there, there's a little child with their hand on the window. And then here again, you see that same view, but looking out of the building. And that view of the public gardens again. But you see how this was my original drawing. And when it became the cover, the designer came up with, there's a color in the background, and things kind of changed. So working on a book, it's a team effort. And this is our downtown in Halifax under construction. So also not just being interested in the buildings when they're finished, but when they're in transition. This is the street I live on, and this would have been one of those drawings I did before I even knew I was working on a book. And it feels appropriate to share now, maybe because a lot of people are talking about Juneteenth today, the Black community, especially in America, celebrating and making us more aware of this holiday that I hadn't heard of before. So in Nova Scotia, there is a large Black community that's been there for about 400 years. And a lot of those people would have come up from the US and were escaping the Civil War, but were not necessarily met with wonderful conditions. So this is the community that I live in, and these children playing. And I'll read the text here just because I think it's important to note some of what happened. So the sound of laughter brought me to Creighton Street. These kids still know how to play. Every night, post-supper, they are doing handstands, cartwheels, and games on the sidewalk, making maximum use of minimum space. I asked if I could draw them, and they quickly said yes. Unlike most times I draw children, they kept right on playing, a game of tag/hide-and-seek centered around the parking signpost. It was only when I was done that they came around to ask questions and give their approval. They saw my sketch from yesterday's trip to McNabb's Island and told me all about their camping trip there with youth group, and then they were gone, on scooters and on foot, dispersing into the evening. So they're sort of very casually, though, I do make it clear that I asked permission. First of all, they're children, and also because of the history within our neighborhood, the Black community doesn't maybe necessarily trust, why is this white woman drawing us? So I have to be aware of my position in those situations, and it's been a learning curve to make sure I do that. And similarly, when I was drawing in Vancouver and went to the Musqueam First Nation and drew there, at first I was going to draw the cultural center, but that would have been okay. But when I drew the longhouse, it became clear that that wasn't a space that I could just represent freely. So to know that that work is going on kind of in the background for me, and I'm always open to learning more and being more aware of what the right thing to do is. But I do particularly like this drawing and how it turned out, because they were so unself-conscious once I asked permission, and just, there was some such movement and expression. And then this tree is now cut down, actually, and the kids have moved away, and the house is no longer vinyl siding, it's shingles. So for me, it's also about recording a particular moment in time and capturing that moment. So this is my second book that came out with Formac, and it's the same size and format as the first book, but the color is quite different, the pink, and the cover image is Lunenburg. So the South Shore of Nova Scotia goes all the way from where that first lighthouse that I showed you is, Peggy's Cove, down to Yarmouth. And that for me was a big kind of adventure, getting to know the architecture of these towns and the people and the way people live. Of course, not being an expert, but just showing up and seeing what happens. So I love this building with the cobblestones. It looks a lot like jelly beans to me. So including the kind of colorful fishing paraphernalia inside the building. An old cobblestone building in Yarmouth now houses Waterview Machine Works, but circa 1919, it was the largest and most modern car garage in the Maritimes. So that's crazy to me because that's just 100 years ago and you would have gone here to buy a car. Selling Ford and Studebaker vehicles. The stones bulge like jelly beans bleached in the sun, and the candy theme continues with the colorful fishing gear featured in the windows. Latin music can be heard at the nearby Shanty Cafe, specializing in authentic Cuban, Indian, and local cuisine, warming a chilly day. And then just up a few blocks was the thrift store. Hey, can I take a peek? Oh, you were drawing the Sally Ann. It is going to move down the street there soon. What's going to happen to this building? Oh, I hate to think about it. I think they might tear it down. I wonder about this they that always seems to come along and take down what is beautiful. So sort of inserting some of my own opinions in there, but also letting local people share their stories. This is a very iconic building in Nova Scotia where people go to eat lobster, the Shore Club. So I love this very kind of kitschy, but the lobster painted up, going up the stairs to the front door. And then outside you see the lobster pot. And this is another community, Tancook Island, where you can only get there by ferry. And as we leave Chester and set off on the ferry for Big Tancook Island, the man collecting our tickets tells me, there are 4 kids at the school now on Tancook. There was a while there when my son was the only one. The near closure of the school became a national news story. Parents protested against the long hours children would spend commuting to the mainland, so the school stays open for now. So here we have the post office, but also in the background, the elementary school. And here we have Drawn Vancouver. So this book started for me almost 3.5 years ago. I guess 3.5 years ago. And I had a desire to spend more time here with my family. My parents live on the North Shore. And like I said, I had grown up in Vancouver, going to elementary school, high school, and my undergrad at UBC. But coming back, I had to kind of reorient myself. And I was lucky that I got to find a place to live over on West 10th, which I felt was a perfect location to be central and go off in all different directions. So I was able to explore, downtown, but West End, West Side, East Side, and even the North Shore is included. And you'll see the book is a very similar size and format, but the text is a little different for the title. So just for one thing, this font didn't work for the word Vancouver because Vancouver is too long of a word. and just working actually with a different publisher. So this publisher is based in Vancouver, Appetite, and I had a wonderful time working with my editor, Lindsay Vermeulen, who might be listening today. And we also had another editor, Lindsay Patterson, and the designer, and Robert McCullough, who was my first point of contact and really championed the project. So I'm very grateful for all the people who worked on it with me. And here, the cover image is Science World. So we have buildings, we have the mountains, we have the water. But you might notice there's actually 2 people working on Science World. I don't know if they were cleaning or fixing something, but at the very top of the very iconic circular building, you see 2 people. So that wasn't intentional, but kind of like my lighthouse. There's this acknowledgement that these things are not static, and they are part of people. People are part of the architecture. So here we have inside the book, you come across the title page, and this image is actually in Deep Cove with the kayaks and a sense of the more residential architecture. And of course, in BC, there's just so many more trees than in Nova Scotia, and bigger trees. And it was fun to go back to basically my childhood, where I remember just staring at the mountains for hours and trying to draw them and being so intrigued by, one mountain behind the other and the way the colors shift and the different greens and the blues. And so becoming familiar all over again with that color palette of Vancouver. And this map, so all my books have a map in the front, and that's always a lot of fun to do. Just putting in a lot of little details, and it's amazing how words can have so much meaning. We build up associations with these places, so just having them all together on a page, and being able to be playful with it, of course, because it's not an accurate map. And this drawing I did actually standing on the Lionsgate Bridge. So there's a little viewing platform that kind of juts out, and I was looking down at the seawall, the boat, and even able to see the leaves. It was autumn, so you had these yellow foliage falling into the ocean. So that's a big part of what I enjoy about doing the drawings on location is I have a really lived memory of the sensation of being on the bridge and being a little nervous, and having walked from North Van, and then I walked, I think, all the way to Third Beach from here. So very different from if I was working from a photograph. And this one in particular, there's a sensation almost of flying because I'm looking down, but I wasn't flying. And this is one of the later drawings, realizing that the art gallery is going to be moving soon, maybe not next year, but there's a plan for it to move to a different location. But where it is now, in proximity to Robson Square and the ice skating, and just feeling like it's really a central heart of the city for me and my memories. So that was an important one, that near the very end, it was like, no, I have to go back and make sure I capture this image. So I'm glad I did. And this one is quite personal to me. So I felt like I was able to be a little bit indulgent, and I love to dance, and I grew up dancing in the North Shore with Anna Wyman. And then my ballet teacher, when I danced with Anna Wyman, was this woman, Danielle, who you see in the center, dressed all in black. And she moved over from France and started Harbour Dance, which is on Granville Street. And maybe I'll read that excerpt also. So, Harbour Dance Center on Granville Street offers adult recreational dance classes from hip hop to salsa. The studio's open up atmosphere means beginners and advanced students brush shoulders. The only prerequisite is making it up the steep flight of stairs to get to class. At the start of ballet class, Danielle Clifford, co-founder of the studio, motions for a more experienced student to come to the front. "What is your name?" "Hillary." "Hillary," she declares in her French accent, shaking her head. Uh-oh, like you know who. "Okay, we won't even talk about it." So when I wrote this was more immediately after the American election 3 or 4 years ago. So hopefully that people still know what I'm talking about. We aren't here to talk about politics, though. We are here to dance. And with that, class begins. On the wall hang photos of Anna Wyman Dance Theatre, a Vancouver-based modern dance company where Danielle once served as ballet mistress. The dancers toured the world in the 1970s and 80s. Anna, a living legend, has a star on the BC Entertainment Hall of Fame Star Walk on the street below, which is visible from the bar as we plie and pirouette. So I really enjoyed making sure we could see the street as well as the studio and Vogue Theatre, and even Kaylee's Pub. A few months later, that sign was gone and is no longer the same name. So capturing a moment in time for sure. And this is down more closer to Gastown. So some of you will recognize the Dominion building. It's a very distinctive roof. Dressed so was somewhere I would go with my mom when I was a kid to get supplies for birthday parties or Halloween costumes. So again, just being kind of very aware that these are precious parts of our city that could easily go out of business or not be there. So for me, there was a sense of urgency. And then some people, of course, would have memories of going to cannabis culture or cannabis cafe, the Amsterdam Cafe, these aspects of Vancouver culture that aren't necessarily present in all cities around the world. So I've come to the end actually of the Vancouver drawings that I had right here with me. And here is Everybody's Different on Everybody Street. So after having done my first 2 books about specific places, I was approached by Nimbus Publishing, so another Nova Scotia-based publisher, to illustrate Everybody's Different on Everybody Street. And it's a poem written by Sherry Fitch. And Sherry writes wonderful children's books and adults books. This poem in particular was written for the Nova Scotia Hospital, which deals specifically with mental health. And so this was a poem to start conversations in the school system about mental health. And it was written about 20 years ago, but it only existed more as a pamphlet. So Nimbus wanted to make it into a book, and I was approached to be the illustrator, and I was just so flattered. And you can see here some of my process. So I have these little drawings, because there were so many characters in each page. There was about 10 people I had to represent, and they all had very unique characteristics and personalities. And this required a lot more of my imagination than when I just draw on location. So in order to get started, I took pieces of paper about the size of baseball cards, and you can sort of see that here. And I would work through what's the character going to look like, and not really using pencil at all at first, and not afraid to just scribble out and start again or do multiples on one page. And then eventually working on tracing paper with pencil to kind of piece it all together like a puzzle. And then using a light box to trace over with pen, and then working more as I normally do, taking the pen into Photoshop and adding the color. So that's a very special project to me, as it was my first published children's book. And the message, of course, I think is just so relevant. And I've been able to go into a lot of schools with this book and work with children and read it to them, and also share what I was thinking when I did the drawings. And this is a more recent children's book that came out in 2019. 2019. So it's called A Pocket of Time, The Poetic Childhood of Elizabeth Bishop. So in the last 6 or 7 years, I became very interested in the poet Elizabeth Bishop, who grew up in Nova Scotia, but actually spent a lot of her adult life in Brazil, and is known more as an American, as that's where she spent her teenage years. But her early childhood was in Great Village in Nova Scotia. So this book takes pieces of her text that she based in Nova Scotia, whether it's from short stories or poems, and leads you through the rooms of the house she grew up in, which still exists, and you can go visit or stay there as an artist in residence, and also takes you through the village and even into the school that still exists. So I was able to go and visit the kids in the school when I was working on this book, and then come back 6 or 7 months later and say, hey, this is the book about your village, Great Village, and this is the school you go to that Elizabeth also went to. So you'll kind of notice a theme in my work, I guess, of places and the importance of place. This book, I used a little bit more texture. You can kind of see that just here, even in the cover, where I was scanning fabric, and I was actually using stamps for that text at the bottom. And that was really fun to be just a little bit more playful and experimental. And I guess I've come a little more quickly than I might have thought to the end here, but I wonder if there's questions right now, and I can always go back to something.
So if anyone has any questions, you can either, I believe, just raise your hand on the platform of Zoom, or just chat in the chat room, and I will pose a question to Emma. Actually, I have here a question, Emma, already. So from Michael. Michael's asking if you've been approached after Vancouver to go to another city and draw another city, okay, and if you can disclose which one it is.
That's a good question. Yeah, so actually I'm working right now on Hand Drawn Victoria. So right now I'm in my dad's house in North Van, but I've been living the last 3 months in Victoria, and I've started that book. So that will be with the same publisher as Hand Drawn Vancouver, and it might take another 2 or so years, but be patient, and there will be Hand Drawn Victoria. And then I don't have anything written in stone or scheduled. I have thought a lot about actually Hand Drawn Dublin, because that's where my dad is from, and my mom went to university there, and I do have family in Ireland, but Hand Drawn Hawaii also sounds very good. So anyway, I will see what happens next.
Thank you, Emma and Michael. So I have another question from Rebecca. Rebecca is asking, how long does it take for you to complete each sketch?
So each sketch is actually pretty quick, because on location, maybe I'm only spending about 20 minutes doing the drawing. Sometimes a little bit longer, but not much longer. And then what takes more time is when I go home, and the coloring might take 2 to 3 hours. And then it's just the fact that there's actually over 100 drawings in each book. And then you also have to do the text, and then you have to edit and figure out the order. Like, it's not actually as easy as you think to figure out the sequence. With the South Shore book, because I went to different places in different seasons, we actually decided to organize it by season, which helped a lot. The Vancouver book is more that we start with that first image of going over the bridge, and we do all of downtown, and then we kind of move west all the way to UBC, and then back over east, and then we go over the Second Narrows, and we're in the North Shore all the way to Horseshoe Bay. So it kind of followed a particular pathway through the city, as opposed to, we didn't just do downtown, then West Van, then UBC, because it wouldn't have been as cohesive. So that's where it takes maybe 2 or 3 years to work on a book, because there's so much that goes into it.
Thank you. So we have another question. So how much editing do you do digitally on your drawings? The question is from, I don't have the full name, it's DH, so I'm sorry if I cannot say your name.
No worries, that's a good question. I mean, I don't... Hello?
Yes.
So I don't tend to do a lot of editing. Like, I do try to just let it be what happens on location. But sometimes I forget to put in a window, and then I go, oh no, I just get too excited doing the bricks, and my hand keeps moving, and then so I might draw something off to the side, and then I can copy and paste that window and put it in later. And likewise, sometimes, I'm very used to working with just 8.5 by 11. That's the size of the sketchbook. But sometimes if the building is 4 stories, like for instance, the Dominion building, I did have to do this over 2 pages, and then I had to stitch them together. And then there's little bits of editing, like there's a copy editor who's looking at all the text, but they're also looking at what I've handwritten within the drawing. And sometimes I'm working too quickly and I spell something wrong, and I have to go back and change the text.
So thank you. So next question, Emma, is from Willie. Hi, Emma. How did you find your sketching style evolved after stopping working in an architect studio?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I mean, definitely this very kind of stylized technique came that particular summer, where I decided I would combine my hand drawing with Photoshop. But before that, I had always sketched for, a good 15 years since I was a teenager. And a lot of my sketching I did in Europe. I was studying in Paris when I was 20. I went on exchange from UBC, and I would travel with my friends, say on the weekend. But if I wanted to get my sketch done, but they wanted to go to a restaurant or a museum, I had to get my drawing done very quickly. So I think that speed and economy came out of that time in my life. And even there was a class we would take where it was called Visite Dessinée, and every Wednesday we went to a completely different location, sometimes, horse dissection, sometimes the sewers. And I remember looking for the sewers in Paris and asking, où est les égouts? This égout means sewer, but I didn't actually know what that meant. I didn't even know where I was going. And then to suddenly find myself under the city in underground. So that time period was very important, and I developed a lot of my style then. And I think not just how I draw, but what I like to draw, that idea of you don't go necessarily and draw the Eiffel Tower right away. What about all these small businesses and other more interesting aspects of a city?
So thank you very much. I have here another question from Paul. Paul is asking, what inspires you the most? The stories of the people or the architecture of the city?
I think it's the stories, because honestly, they are so surprising. I will share maybe one from my Halifax book. So I had shown you that construction So this was a big deal because we didn't really have this in Halifax for many years. Like now there's a lot of cranes downtown, there's a lot of development, but for a long time this just sat empty and there was no cranes ever. So I knew it was important to draw this particular moment in time, and that was my motivation. But I'll just read the text here. Boyfriend, boyfriend, cried out the man in the taxicab idling beside me as I drew the construction site for the new Halifax Convention Centre, and I ignored him. Then I realized he was saying, portrait, portrait. I turned and said, yes, a building portrait. Through the window of his vehicle, he handed me a clipboard with papers that contained sketches. They were mostly of buildings made of stone. He was from Iran and was drawing his village from memory while he waited for clients. He was glad to learn where he could find drawing classes and then was off to drive Halifax while thinking about his homeland. So there's a few different things that happened there. One was my first assumption that he wanted to be my boyfriend, which, I mean, there is that element as a woman alone sometimes that, you know, there can be sometimes unwelcome attention, but actually it was a very innocent and sort of generous gesture of, I want to show my drawings to you. And it was a beautiful moment, and but one I couldn't have predicted. And if I'd gone the next day, I wouldn't have had that same experience. Something else would have happened. So I think that's what keeps me motivated. So I don't just feel like a machine, you know, it's like I give energy when I do the drawing, but the experience also gives energy back to me.
Okay. So thank you very much. So I have here another question, which I believe you sort of answered already, and the person is saying the same, but they are asking if there's ever a place that you really would like to draw, which one would it be?
Yeah, I guess I'm just open right now in Victoria. I'm just noticing that sense of urgency because, for instance, up the hill from me, there's a beautiful rose garden, and knowing that roses are going to end soon, and then there'll be something else. But I think always around me, I can find things that are interesting, and that's, again, what keeps me motivated, that I don't have to go too far to find something interesting.
Thank you very much. So I have here another question. How emotional it is, your process of drawing, since you tell so many stories?
Oh, that's a nice question. I guess I just sort of take it for granted that that's what I do. But I do remember telling someone at the checkout in Cambie Village that I was in the choices and telling her I was working on a book. And the woman said, oh, you need so much quiet in your soul or something like this to write a book. And I really liked that she just came out with that. And I do live, you know, alone, and I have a lot of time to myself. So I think I would be writing different stories if I, you know, had a family that, and only a certain amount of time to work on my illustration and drawings. I know a lot of, you know, people who have kids, they get inspired by their kids. For instance, a lot of Sherry's poems are written about her experience being a mother. But for me, I don't have a lot of people to answer to. So I think that luxury of time is what's allows my work to be what it is. Yeah. And not to say that won't change and fluctuate in the future, but for now I have time.
Yeah, so next question is from Jay. Jay's asking, first of all, just give me 1 second because I have a lot of questions here. Actually, thank you all very much for participating. I'm finding Jay's question again. So yes. So first of all, very fun and spontaneous illustrations. And Jay's asking, how did you manage your time?
Okay, nice question. So I don't know if Naomi is present here on the call. Naomi is a friend who actually just published her own book called Goose Feather about her travels around the world. And I met her near the beginning of my time in Vancouver, and she had a weekly writing group at her house in Cambie Street. So every Wednesday I went there for, I think it was just 2 or 3 hours. It was like from 10, I think just 10 till noon actually on Wednesdays. And that was really helpful because it kept me accountable to chipping away so that it didn't build up, that because I was in Vancouver for 10 months to work on the book. And then I had a lot of work that I still did afterwards back in Nova Scotia. But yeah, being in a group setting, sometimes it was just the two of us. Mostly it was just the two of us. And she was working on her book. I was working on my book. But that was very helpful. And then I guess I'm lucky that I enjoy it. So I motivate myself by the fact that I like to do it. And I have other aspects of my business. Like I do sell cards and I sell prints and I do house portraits. But sometimes it's fun to procrastinate from those other things by working on my book. And so maybe there's some reverse psychology there where I think of it as the fun work. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to avoid doing the stuff that might make me money today. I'm going to just work on this. And for some reason that seems to work. In Victoria, I'm lucky that there is a similar group. And even though it's COVID and we can't meet together, they're doing Zoom group working sessions once a week. So I've tried that once already now and I found it very effective. So yeah, I think for me, being accountable to other people and then just trying to enjoy the work. Yeah.
Thank you. So I have another question from Willie. Willie's asking, have you ever done murals or larger reproductions of your work in interiors?
Yes. So a long time ago, I have painted murals, but never really in like a professional sense. But these kind of style of drawings that you see here, I have worked with restaurants and even a tourism company where my drawing wraps the van. But in those cases, the drawing is only about this big, and then I scan it at a very high resolution, and there's either a poster company or a sign company that will create an adhesive. And actually right now I'm working with the Children's Hospital in Nova Scotia, and the pediatric ward will have my drawings for the children's hospital room. So that's very exciting. But basically in those situations, I'm licensing the image, and sometimes it's a custom piece, but sometimes it's work I've already done and they're interested in having it in their space.
Okay, thank you again. I have next question is from Lindsay. Lindsay is asking, do you have a favorite illustration that didn't make it into the finished book?
That's a good question. There was a lot of drawings that I was afraid that wouldn't make it in, and that I was ready, and I had resigned myself that they might not make it in, especially some of the images of West Vancouver. But in the end, the editor did a very good job, and I don't really think anything didn't make it in that I was too sad about. And then with my Halifax book, I did a coloring book after. So that was just black and white drawings, but some of the drawings that didn't make it into the Halifax book made it into the coloring book. I can think of one in particular called Love is Everything, a drawing of Gottingen Street. So yeah, it's nice that the drawings I've done them and then they can still have a life at some other point in time, even if they don't make it into the book it was intended for. And luckily there's not too many that don't make it in. I think I had enough of a sense of how many I needed. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Next question is from Philippa. So Philippa is asking Emma, if during the quarantine staying inside, did you draw? And if you did, what?
That's a good question. Yeah, I did actually do quite a large painting, which is a bit unusual for me. So I took out my oil pastels and my watercolors and I let myself get messy, which I think was good for me because, yeah, the way I work right now is kind of contained in a certain way. Like I always working 8.5 by 11, scanning into the computer. And that helps. That's actually part of probably the time management in that it keeps me organized because I work in a more efficient way. But when I, pulled out this big pad of paper and the messiness started, that was also a nice juicy feeling. And I was drawing the view out of my window because, it was springtime in Victoria and the lilacs were coming out and the leaves were all coming out of the trees. So yeah, I was a bit more inspired by nature and the garden outside my window. I did begin to draw outside on the sidewalk, but of course I had to be aware of social distancing. And there was one time that I kind of regret that I was a little too close to the sidewalk and an elderly woman, got a little upset with me, and I understood completely, but I had the false perception that it was so quiet, no one would be bothered by me. But again, you have to be aware. So that was a bit of a wake up that, okay, I should go to a park where there can be much more space and I'm not close to the sidewalk. Yeah.
So next question, do you have any advice on finding a publisher and promoting a book?
Okay, so yeah, I think everyone's experience is so individual. That's the unfortunate part, is that it can be difficult to prescribe advice. But in my case, like, I have never had an agent, and that's something that some people recommend, and you can look into that or research that. But I, first went to this festival, which happens in major cities across Canada, did the pitch. So if you were to look up Word on the Street, pitch to the publisher, hopefully that'll be up and running again at some point in the future. I had also, maybe 10 years previous, sent a portfolio of drawings to Nimbus, who I ended up working on the kids' books with. And at that point, I just got an email saying, thank you so much for your submission. We'll keep it on file. But, 6 or 7 years passed before anything happened. So I would say, just like, it's almost like stabs in the dark, and you just have to kind of pick yourself up and try again. And I had taken a course with Michael Katz of Tradewind Books, based in Granville Island. So he does a continuing education course out of UBC. So it was a night class I took, and he kind of gave a lot of pointers, and I think that probably helped my confidence. And you see what other people are working on. And there's also Squibby, Society of Children's Illustration and Book. I'm going to forget what the acronym is, but there are these different kind of societies and associations you can join, and conferences. And I think getting out and meeting people is important, because it is about who you know. And then with the second book, I did look at 2 other publishers in Vancouver, and it turned out one of them doesn't do full color books, and one of them, it didn't quite fit with their mandate. So you need to kind of look on the web and research the publishers and find out, what are they interested in. And to be honest, Appetite, I'm kind of surprised that they wanted to do my book, because mostly they do cookbooks. But as it turned out, I approached them just as they were starting to do more lifestyle books and looking to do books about cities. And I will admit, there was a personal connection. So my mom knew Robert personally, and I still emailed in a professional way through their website. And I think, the pitch stood on its own legs, but there was an element of knowing somebody there. And was there another part of the question? Oh, promoting the book.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was lucky that when I was doing my house portrait business, I was in the self-employment benefits program. So maybe I was just going to go back to speaker view. Can you see me now? This is good?
Yes. Yeah, this is good.
So I was getting training in marketing myself as a business at that particular moment when I started my first book. And so I started a website. I started using social media more with Facebook and eventually Instagram. And a publisher does kind of want to see that you have done some legwork just to have a following or people who are interested in you. And that will help them be assured that you will get the word out there about your own book, because as much as they have publicists, you kind of are your own best advocate, I've realized. And for me, the fact that I teach classes and I sell cards and I sell prints, it means that my work is circulating in all these different ways, and people will talk about, oh, and she has a book. And so, yeah, for me, it's worked out well to have different aspects of my business all working together. And this particular government program, the self-employment benefits, is again a national program. And I was eligible because I was on EI and was unemployed. So maybe some of you, because of COVID, are on EI, and that's something you can look into. But I focused it as a house portrait business. I didn't say I'm going to become an author illustrator. That just happened organically.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your honesty as well, Emma. I have actually here one last question. If there's any more questions, I believe Emma is willing to answer as well. So the next question is asking if there's any reason why it seems to be only daytime sketches, not nighttime. Do you find it hard drawing at night?
To be honest, I guess I didn't include nighttime sketches but in the presentation, but I do have nighttime sketches in here. One in particular was at Bard on the Beach in Vancouver, as it was dark out, and then also I was in the audience, so it was pretty dark. So for those of you who don't know, Bard on the Beach is a Shakespeare festival, and I don't know if I'll be able to find it to show you, but it's challenging, but it can actually be kind of fun to not be able to see everything. And obviously with my style not being very precise, it's okay. It doesn't affect it too poorly. Sorry, I'm not finding it here, but within the book there is probably 5 or 6 night scenes. And you're right, it is an important part of the city and life in the city. I'll admit though, actually this drawing is of the fireworks in Vancouver that happen at night. And you can kind of see the city and then the fireworks coming up. But my dad actually was in hospital that particular summer, and this was the view from his hospital room. And it was the perfect view for the fireworks, but because of hospital rules, I couldn't be there at night to watch the fireworks. So I did the sketch during the day and then imagined the fireworks as my dad was able to see them from his bed. So there are some moments where there's some cheating happening and filling in the gaps. But I think because I have gone to the fireworks so many years at night, I know what, that sensation is. And then here is the image. I was sitting in the audience. This was at Bard on the Beach, and you can kind of see the darkened view of Stanley Park and the water. And there's even moths flying to the spotlights. So yeah, little details that if you just were sitting at home trying to draw, well, what would it look like at night at Bard on the Beach? Maybe you wouldn't think to draw those moths. So yeah, it always helps. And one of my students talked about going to a concert and drawing, musicians kind of blindly without being able to see them. And so I think you can be playful as to what representation means and what representation is.
Okay, so thank you very much. We don't have any more questions. Feel free to post them as I say my goodbyes and my last thank yous. And first of all, I want to thank you all very much for joining us. And thank you, Emma, for being so kind in this collaboration with us. To everyone that is interested in the book is going to be out on June 23rd. It's beautiful, as you saw, and we will host another weekly art talk next week. If you're interested in joining, please go on our website, vancouverchinesegarden.com, and we will see you next time. And I believe Emma also wants to say her goodbyes. And then if you have any questions after the talk, you have my email, and you can email the question to me and I will forward it to Emma as well.
Thank you so much, Bruno, and thank you for all those wonderful questions. I'm impressed you were all able to come up with them on the spot, and it sounds like some of you are interested in yourself possibly in writing or illustrating books. So yeah, I encourage you. In my situation, it's something I always wanted to do, but then it took a few different careers and a few different turns before that happened. And yeah, just a very big thank you to everyone who worked on the book with me, and all the booksellers and librarians now, and who are kind of the bridge between the author and illustrator and the readers, and they're going to be sharing and promoting on my behalf. So and thank you to you all just for being together, because yeah, it has been a very kind of strange time, I think, and it's important to find a way to come together still.
Okay, thank you all very much. And yeah, Rebecca, so this is just kind of an inside joke, Emma, for you. Rebecca is asking if we can have your book for sale in the Yat-Sen Chinese Garden. So, because it's just so lovely. So hopefully we'll have your book there as well. So when you come and visit our garden, please make sure you go to our store, because we'll have Emma's book for sure.
Wonderful.
So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Bruno.